We've done traditionally on these first 4 sessions, we've done quite a bit of review at the top. Today we're going to do minimal review and really just start in a new place a little bit. But the core idea here is that what we're talking about when we're saying global biospheric restoration are the biological aspects of our climate system and our life support systems, and that those are actually, as we learned in the first section, those are in dire distress right now. They've been radically reduced. It looks like it wouldn't be unfair to say maybe 60% of global biospheric assets have been destroyed in the last 50 years or so, believe it or not. Since World War II, certainly, there's been a ton of change, and that's in the previous videos, as well as a whole lot about solutions and the viability being a real thing, and that we're talking about working with the best resources literally in the universe to restore the planet and to respond to climate change in the way that makes the most sense both for the biosphere and the climate system. So, okay, so last week's review is super short today. All we did last week was talk about Earth's most biodiverse ecosystems, which are tropical forests, and the potential and necessity of restoring them, the non-negotiable necessity of these ecosystems to our planet. And this is the summary slide. We'll come back to this later in this presentation. But this is the area that I can talk about for hours and hours. Today's presentation will be things that I sort of have, at best, a thumbnail understanding. And so what we're going into is a little more concept stuff on what it means to build a richer future. You know, how do we want to orient ourselves and our values when we're thinking about responding to the crises that we're facing now, the wildfires, the hurricanes. Pretty soon we'll have I'm sure some blizzards. You know, there's just a lot of things going on right now that it's easy to lose perspective on the idea of where do we want to be. And then we'll talk about other ecosystems and the vast network of expertise that exists. And I apologize, I've been super slide heavy so far, but when we get to that part of this presentation, I run out of slides because I didn't have time to make them. So that'll be just talking. Okay, so section 1 here, building a richer future. It's kind of 4 big concepts in my mind. We're talking about the sum of the parts being really what a biosphere is, what is required for biodiversity to be productive in terms of relationships, and what that productivity really kind of means, and then the idea of responding to today's crises with abundance. And I think there's a good chance everybody listening and watching is familiar with permaculture and with what Wayne's doing with the Colonomics, and is already probably engaged in learning about other ways to bring biological abundance into business context. And so some of this may be redundant today. Some of these things you may feel like you already know this stuff, and if you do, I apologize. If you don't, to me, these are some of the most exciting concepts in the world. So the first big idea here is that the sum of the parts is what matters. There's so much to see, and there's just no way to really create a endless archive of photos. This isn't even the tip of the iceberg.
Probably the evolutionary ancestors were green algae. The most basic group of plants are bryophytes, and they are mosses and their relatives. There are no aquatic mosses, or very few. Let's just say for now that they're not really that relevant. Then you go to ferns and their relatives. Then you get to plants that have seeds, and there are 2 types: cone-bearing, of which, by the way, there's about as many cone-bearing plants as there are aquatic plants. So those numbers are similar. And then finally, we have flowering plants, which is the vast majority of plants. So they are they're with flowers, and they have seeds enclosed in fruit. So here's the breakdown. There are 235,000 species of flowering plants, about 15,600 of mosses and ferns, 11,000 of, mosses, and 11,000 of ferns, and 760 of cone-bearing plants. So I was a little bit off from the total numbers. This total would be closer to 260 rather than 255. And there are 760 conifers, cone-bearing. And again, no one else is putting in another answer. Don't be shy. Your answer might not be right, but it's not a bad answer. There are about 1,000 species of aquatic flowering plants. There are three main parts of plants. There are roots, which absorb water and nutrients, and they create the anchor or the foundation for a plant. They have leaves, which are where photosynthesis occurs. And they have stems. And stems are the rigid tissue that supports the leaves and also transports substances back and forth between the leaves and the roots. So I'm not going to go into a lot more detail of that.
Write down what your financial goals are. It adds to the accountability of it. It helps us stay on track. Very often when we have these things in our head, it's very easy to get distracted, or as we said last week, that our needs and wants can get muddled sometimes because of our emotions. I mean, financial well-being is being in tune with our emotional side. Money means something to every single person and probably means more than one thing to everyone. And that's the holistic side of the financial planning. Tonight we're going to do more tactical, but I don't want to lose sight of the fact that the reason that some of these very basic things don't get done is that we don't deal with the emotional side of managing money. So one of the tactics that you can use to help overcome that is to write down a plan. And then you must review this plan. It's not good enough to write the plan, but at least annually to take a look and see if you're making headway on these plans, or do these plans need to change because other life events have occurred. So very important. So then the other part of this, and we talked a little bit about this last time, about setting goals. And I find that people have trouble with goal setting because they don't understand, what if I have multiple goals and I only have a certain amount of money to save, so how am I going to manage that? So if you take a look at the chart, you have short-term goals, which are less than 5 years, midterm, which is 5 to 12, and then long-term 12 plus, right? So you just write down the due date, when is it due, when do you want to accomplish this goal, how much do you think you might need, and how much you're going to commit, to saving. So, and then the allocation on the side. So let's look at an example. So I might want to buy a home. Now this could mean even if you're going into retirement, you may want to purchase a second home, you may want to purchase a different home, and I'm saying that this is 5 years. I'm talking about having only $100 to save in this example, okay? So, and then my midterm goal, I have college tuition, and then I want to retire. So I only have this $100. So I'm going to put the majority of the money towards my short-term goal, right? I'm going to put $60 to that, and then I'm going to put $20 towards college and $20. And the reason that I can afford to do less for retirement, and that when I talk to younger people, they're often like a little baffled that I'm telling them to put less away for retirement at this point, because you need less capital if you have more time. So time is your friend.
Tell us a little bit about, let's go into that area, because that's something I'm really not familiar with. I think I may be a little bit, because when I go to my chiropractor, obviously they're dealing with the back and
Yes.
they're adjusting you and they're getting your spine all aligned so that the nerves flow right. Well, my chiropractor does some stuff where he touches and puts pressure on my head and different areas. Is that what cranial sacral
Yeah, well,
therapy is?
it's a little, let's see, the touch is a little less less forceful or less pressure often than is used in some chiropractic techniques. And it's working with the craniosacral system. So if you don't mind, I'm going to grab a prop here for a second.
Perfect, perfect.
Okay. This is my friend Harry.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yes, because he has no hair.
I love it.
The craniosacral system is comprised of the cerebral spinal fluid, which kind of coats and protects our brain. And it goes all the way down kind of this hole here where your spinal cord comes out. And so that cerebral spinal fluid kind of protects that part of our nervous system. And it's a dynamic fluid, so it has an ebb and a flow, which we call the craniosacral rhythm. Now, you traditionally learn in med school that these bones where the different colors are, that these sutures all fuse once we reach a certain age in development. But there actually is a little bit of that you can palpate a little bit of movement at the sutures. And that movement is guided by that craniosacral rhythm. And when we've had past injuries, you've had, like, you maybe played soccer and you did a lot of little head balls, or fell off your bike and, maybe landed and put some pressure here. You might then create a level of stress and tension that then translates through the connective tissue layers surrounding the brain and protecting the brain, that meninges, or the dura, they call it. So, and that connective tissue from the dura then also connects to the connective tissue that surrounds our whole body. It's all one big sleeve. And so a tug and pull in one place, like on a shoulder, can also impact the opposite hip. And so being able to feel where and how people have adjusted to or compensated for traumas, physical and or emotional, which we can sometimes hold emotional trauma in the tissue. The craniosacral therapy is a gentle way to invite a release if the body's no longer needing to hold on to that pattern, and reminding the body how to go back into the place of balance and ease.
Could you hold that up to the facial area? Because you mentioned sutures, so all the different colors are different places that
where the bones meet. So each color represents a different bone. So we've got like the maxillary bone here. We have the sinuses back there. The mandible. A lot of people get tension in the jaw. This is a very sensitive area right here. Look at how many bones kind of are right here around the jaw area. So you can get people's jaws. This he actually does. You can give him TMJ. Yeah, he might be grinding his teeth at night. I think some people in the audience can relate to that.
Absolutely.
But when things get really held and there's muscles surrounding this area, the tension pulls, and then there's connective tissue kind of around that muscle area. We can release the connective tissue pull, then that creates slack, and then this doesn't have to stay as restricted and tight. So it's a way to complement treatments like acupuncture or chiropractic care, and sometimes helps people hold those other treatments longer. Because often with those modalities, you have to kind of go back pretty frequently. And I generally see folks for craniosacral work every 2 to 4 to 6 weeks, depending on what symptoms you're tracking, because it's like a gentle invitation, and then the body kind of sinks into it and integrates that release, and then you kind of give another nudge.
What I'll say is, without your health, you really can't do any of that. So it's so important to put yourself first and understand what makes your body work and how you can heal yourself. Without some of the bad drugs that are out there, there's a lot of good drugs obviously too, but there's just a lot that your body can do for itself, and that's what we're trying to teach you through this series. I'm just amazed almost in preparing for these series how amazing our body is. It's a wonderful, wonderful system, and it's just unbelievable how it works. It's obviously a perfectly designed machine, and I'll leave that at that. but I would like to say that last week we talked about the two different sides of the immune system. And, you know, obviously the immune system is there. It's a specific area in our body. It is through our whole body. It works through specific cells, specific organs and glands, and different tissues. Obviously, the role of immunity is very essential to our health. If we don't have an immune system, we die. It's just that simple. You've probably heard about some people that have gone through chemotherapy, for an example, and they literally get their immune system goes down to very close to zero, where they just are barely alive, and they have to rebuild that immune system so they can get back to getting out of bed, being able to get up. So when your immune system isn't working, you just aren't able to function, and then disease sets in. And it can be as simple as, you know, you just let yourself run down a little bit. You don't get enough rest that week. You don't get quite the right nutrients, and you catch that cold or a flu that puts you out of work for 7 or 8 days, or even just 2 days. But it can be very valuable time that you're missing. So it's really important that we understand. And then last week we got into the two different types of the immune system. I'm going to jump ahead real quick here. There was the innate immune system and the adaptive immune system. And today we're going to talk a little more in detail about the adaptive immune system. And last week was real kind of technical, and we got into all these different cells and went through each cell. We're not going to do that today. We're going to specifically go and discuss the CD4 cells and the CD8 cells and how those work, where those come from, how they're created in the body, and why they're so important. Because those are key cells in our immune system. And we all have them, and we all have to have them for our immune system to work properly. And Dad, jump in here anytime if I'm if you need to, or if I'm not covering something that we talked about.
Well, we're gonna in lieu of that, we're also gonna touch briefly on natural killer cells and beta lymphocytes, or B cells. So
okay.
we're gonna just, you know, it's kind of touch and go with all of them because they're all woven together pretty well.
Yeah. So last week we went through each one individually and tried to give you an idea of what they did. Today we're going to hit the more important ones, let's put it that way, and they're all important, so that was the wrong word, but we're going to hit certain ones that we feel that you need to understand why they are so important, and that's what we're going to try and cover today. We're also going to cover today, wait a minute, hold on a minute. Sorry guys, I should go out of this, but I'm jumping through here. So we talked about the innate and the adaptive. We're going to talk more about the adaptive today. We're also going to hit on a particular gland, and we're going to focus on the thymus gland.
I'm going to just introduce Evan real quick. We're going to have fun here for the next hour, as we always try to do. We try to make it right on time to get through with this so that everybody has a chance to get on to what their lives are. Please put your questions on the screen if you have them for us. And you know, we've got a new ability now that we can actually have people come in and talk to us if they'd like. We can actually add them and put them on screen if you'd like to be. So if you want to do that, you might just indicate that in a message that you put. So you can type your chat messages. We'll try to communicate with you. How many people we have now? Because it'll go, yeah, so there's 5 people watching us on Meerkat, and we'll just have some fun. So what we'll start with is just to let Evan talk about himself. Evan and I met, I think for the first time, quite a little while ago, actually over LinkedIn, and then we've recently connected quite a bit more frequently, and we're actually hopefully going to be doing some fun stuff together, collaborating on some things. And so I'm just going to turn it over to you, Evan. Just tell us a little bit about yourself and your business, and just sort of give us an introduction.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you having me today, Wayne. My experience has been, basically to wade into the environment of health and agriculture as a novice, which I think is the position that most people start out in. And what my business, all encompassing, has become is kind of a methodology of how to get more people involved and how to allow them to have their own moment of kind of coming to terms with how we teach ourselves versus how we actually leverage the power of the natural world in farming and in health. So I started a business over 13 years ago called Progressive Gardens, and it's a retail gardening store. And I've since started a company called Progressive Farms that is a farming business. We have a 10-acre farm that we're contracted to grow in our town and in Wilmington, North Carolina. And it's also a product development and distribution company that sells and consults to farmers and lawn care companies and retail garden centers all over the country and all over the world, for that matter. So we're on the cusp of starting a rebranding of our project that we're calling Be Agriculture. And the concept being that we want to invite people to be a part of agriculture, really, whether you like it or not, you already are. So, we're trying to champion ideals such as, as Wendell Berry said, eating is an agricultural act. What we think, we grow. It's been my experience and it's my opinion that, people that are informed and that they're operating in ways and using their buying power to really encourage what they want to see, that's a much more healthy tool to affect the change that we want to see than it is lobbying or, any other matter of social change. So, my experience has been through the ins and outs of all of these environments, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here to talk a little bit about what we do and maybe how we can connect with more people to do more of it.
That's great. Boy, there's been some really cool pictures that I've been seeing, and the audience hasn't yet, but I know we're all going to see all of them. And I saw one that was really cool. I just got to use this one. There was a Ford truck in there. What year is your Ford truck that the banner was on?
You ask about the truck. Oh, trusty. It's in 1985, late model, just had fuel injection. So it's actually got about 80,000 miles on it.
How do we understand how these systems are going to work? And if you live in a place like this is just something you're going to have to deal with. Fire is a part of it. Now, eliminating parasites, mistletoe. You may want to eliminate them because you don't have as good tree growth. It's not as straight and as tall. These trees obviously will grow slower than if they had green all the way down. But we also want to think about this. This is actually a very useful product. Anybody who has Christmas and people who kiss each other, you can be selling mistletoe for the holiday season. And actually, I've worked quite a bit with growers in Oklahoma, actually supplying mistletoe to medicinal herb companies. It's used as an anti-cancer compound. I don't exactly know how it's used, but that's used in the herbal cancer apothecary. But fire tends to retain the fire-dependent species on an area. So if you're in an area that is ponderosa pine or jack pine, it'll burn through, the seeds will come down, it's favorable conditions for that species. And the jack pine will regenerate, and then the fire comes through and the jack pine will regenerate. The southern pines, red pines, white pines, lodgepole pines, oaks of the whole oak savanna region, whether it was California, the whole southwest oak savanna, the front range of the Rockies oak savanna, or the whole midwestern humid oak savannas. The oak is not like the most shade tolerant late successional species. It's a mid-successional species, but it was maintained by repeated fires, and of course grazing and browsing was thrown in there as well. That these fire-dependent species in an area where the fire is kept burning at a regular interval or irregular interval, if the case may be, but within a certain fire period, each different trees will have a different fire period that they want to have fire more frequently than this, but less frequently than that in order for them to regenerate. And all of these different species I just mentioned are different. And if the fire regime changes, the whole successional pathway changes. So like in the Rockies, for example, Engelmann spruce is not very fire tolerant at all. Douglas fir is a little bit more fire tolerant. Ponderosa pine is very fire tolerant, and eventually have these beautiful ponderosa pine savannas with the grasses underneath. Well, if the fire is even more frequent, even these trees will get damaged. There'll be fewer and fewer ponderosas, and it'll eventually turn into a grassland. That's the fire's more frequent. Less frequent, it'll be more Engelmann spruce. Well, then if it goes the other way around, if we decrease the fire frequency, we can shift from total ponderosa pine like here right now, then all of a sudden our less fire or are more fire sensitive, they would burn out, species will grow up underneath, and then eventually these guys, the ponderosas, won't have anywhere to seed because they need it to be burned and bare soil underneath in order for them to propagate. So then it'll become Douglas fir and eventually Engelmann spruce.
So let's jump straight into thinking about transportation and why we're talking about it tonight. And I guess the reason I thought it was so important to talk about is if you look at total energy consumption of just about any developed country, you'll notice that transportation to energy use takes up a very sizable percentage of the total energy used for all purposes by that civilization. For the United States, it happens to be about 28% and just used for transportation. So if you're thinking about how to design a sustainable and regenerative system for people to live in and you don't pay attention to transportation, then you're probably not going to be very successful. You've got to think about that as part of your overall way of approaching energy use in your system. So, since we are talking about something that takes up about a quarter of all the energy consumption in a lot of the developed world, you're going to have to address it if you're going to operate in the real-time energy budget of the sun, which is one of our goals. Yes, I've actually been on a bus that looked kind of like this in certain areas of the developing world. If you see this picture in the upper right, as we start looking at it, we think about one of the big problems. We said that 60% of the energy almost that's being used for transportation right now is being used for cars, light trucks that are more personal vehicles.
We have a countrywide, our listing is about 7,000 people and practitioners we have on our database. On our sites, we have about 2,000 listed.
Wow.
And then then we have fewer that have pages, they pay us a monthly fee.
Well, that's huge.
But all in all, we can connect people with about 7,000 people listed in South Africa.
Now, so those of you out there listening, and I'm first on the top of the list, I don't know much about South Africa. How big of an area are you talking about, and how big of an area do you cover down there? Just roughly. I mean, is South Africa the size of one of our states or half the United States or?
Okay, if you look at England, right. England will fit inside KwaZulu-Natal. I live in KwaZulu-Natal. That's my province. England fits inside KwaZulu-Natal.
Wow, and that's just one province in South Africa?
That's just one province, and we're not by far not the biggest province. So South Africa is a huge area.
Do you cover all of South Africa or just your province?
No, we cover the national.
Okay.
Yeah. But our three main provinces are Gauteng, that's where Johannesburg is, and the Western Cape, that's where Cape Town is, and KZN, that's where I am, in Durban.
Okay.
So, but we do have listings throughout the country, but they're not big listings. Our three main databases are those three cities.
Okay, so I'm going to try and put it in practical applications. Let's say I came to you and I'm fighting a cancer, let's say, of some sort. And I got onto your website, I've done my research. I don't particularly at this point want to go with chemo or radiation. I want to try some of the alternative methods first. How do you interact with me now to try and figure out of all those 7,000 different practitioners that you have, or at least maybe the 2,000 that you have on your website, how would you interact with me, and then how do you get me to that one of those people?
It's basically what I said earlier with well, you would normally have emailed me,
right,
and I would obviously offer my concerns and ask you questions about it, and then I would consult my practitioners and go out to my network and ask them their advice. I would never offer advice because I am definitely not educated enough in the natural health arena. I haven't studied enough, but I do know my healers, and I would ask their advice.
Okay, so you would obviously take my geographical location into context.